Hey up. Right, caught out by the weather again, or should I say caught out by the weatherman again. It was forecast rain all day on Monday, so I didn't bother trying to film that project that I've been hanging on to for a couple or 3 weeks now because of the weather. And then it didn't rain, well, we got sort of 10 minutes of light rain midday. It doesn't matter how old you get, you still sort of put your faith in that there weatherman, and he never fails to let you down. Just going back 2 or 3 years ago, I covered the story of Norton's demise with that dastardly Stuart Garner, a man who used the Mac as a cash cow, spending money on his lavish lifestyle, Aston Martins, properties abroad, even though the brand wasn't actually making any money, spending customers and investors' cash and then failing to come up with the goods. And one of the real tragedies of this, of course, that it was enabled by the press, by the mainstream media and the motorcycle press, in stealing investors' retirement funds and customers' deposits by failing to do their due diligence and telling everyone that the sun shone from his arse. Now, as we all know, at the last moment, TVS from India stepped in and bought the brand for a bit of a bargain, really, with a promise not only to keep the Norton name alive, but to continue building Nortons here in the UK, which, personally, I think is a mistake, but, you know, it's not me, is it? And, of course, the news that hit the headlines last week was that Norton's pre-tax losses of £38.2 million for the year to March 31st, 2024. Things are not looking so rosy, bearing in mind that the year before they also lost 29.6 million, and I think they lost the year before that as well, although that was the year that they bought the firm out, so maybe we shouldn't count that. But so far, since TVS bought the firm, it's lost getting on for £100 million, or £100 million has been invested into it with no returns so far. Now, we don't know whether this loss was planned or expected and whether it actually is a loss. Don't forget, Stuart Garner didn't really invest much into Norton. They didn't really have a proper factory. It was a sort of minimalist but rather posh shed where the motorcycles were assembled from parts, providing the parts were available, depending on whether or not he'd paid the bill for the parts. And even then, I've even heard stories that if he hadn't paid the bill and they didn't have the parts, they would just strip down customers' bikes that were in for service or warranty work. And this is the problem with Norton, isn't it? It's got such a bad name now. We've seen this story play out so many times over the decades. The same happened with Triumph back in the 1970s and even the late 1960s, to be honest. Not so much fraud, but incompetence, where we were constantly told that the brand was making a comeback and then it didn't, and then money was borrowed from the government to get it up on its feet again, and the money disappeared, but the brand didn't come back. To some extent, the current owners of Norton have to start from square one. They've got to, kit out a proper factory. And they've got to sort the bikes out because there were some problems with the models that had been released. And although they didn't have to, they also decided that they were going to put the bikes right from customers from the Garner days who'd had problems and make sure that they all had viable, reliable motorcycles that had originally been promised and had paid for. And none of this comes cheap. I think we should be looking at Norton as being still in the investment stage. But if I'm honest, I still have reservations about the brand. This business model has been tried so many times. Build small numbers of very expensive machines and, survive from that. It never seems to work. I mean, Garner introduced the 650 Atlas as being a more affordable Norton, but as we know, that turned out to be a bit of a sham. But even he read the room and realised that unless, something affordable was put on offer, the brand wasn't going to survive. Selling 40-something £1,000 motorcycles, it's been tried before and it doesn't work. You've just got to look at Hesketh a few decades ago. And actually, I don't know whether they're still around, but Brough Superior, they were making some gorgeous bikes, but they were around about the £100,000 mark, and there just aren't many takers for a motorcycle like that. Even Triumph tried this to some extent back in 2016 when they suddenly announced that they were a premium brand. We had the outgoing air-cooled Triumph Bonneville, which I think at that point sold for about £6,000 on the road, and then overnight the new water-cooled version came out and it had almost doubled in price at over £10,000. And despite what any motorcycle journalist says, it failed to reverse Triumph's fortunes. I mean, back in 2000 they were selling about 127,000 motorcycles a year. And despite all the public crowing about how they're smashing the sales records year after year in the last few years, they still failed to sell 100,000 this year. They were just under that target. It seems to me that they were basically just bolstering their profits by overcharging for the bikes that they were selling, and that's not sustainable, hence the new 400cc single models. And I think this is the same problem that Norton have. They're relying on sales to wealthy, older gentlemen who are buying from a sort of viewpoint of nostalgia, which there's nothing wrong with that. But if there are no newcomers coming to the brand and coming to motorcycling, younger riders, which there aren't, eventually your customer base is going to die out. And 10 or 15 years in the future, most of your customer demographics are going to be sitting in ends on a widow's mantelpiece, or they're going to be 6 foot under. So I don't see how making £40,000 to £50,000 motorcycle is going to be sustainable long term. Now, of course, TVS have their budget motorcycles, their own range of budget motorcycles in India. That's what's basically financed the buyout of Norton and its current development. And it's been mooted to me many times in the comments section over the last 3 years that, the current Norton project is just the CEO of TVS's hobby. It was described as a vanity project, which I think that sounds a little bit harsh. And it's something that we see a lot now from wealthy Chinese and Indian industrialists buying old, defunct British brands and injecting lots of cash into them to get them viable again. We've seen this with BSA, but at least they are relatively affordable. And I've got to admit, these do appear to be business decisions based on, the buyer's own nostalgia. Now, when I first started this channel up, 8 years ago now, it was a mainly sort of UK, US, Australian audience with a few Europeans thrown in for good measure. But since I adopted the Royal Enfield motorcycles, obviously we've pulled in quite a lot of Indian viewers as well. And the comments have both shocked and surprised me in a lot of ways, because I didn't realise just how much anti-UK sentiment there is in India. Don't get me wrong, I'm not tarring everybody with the same brush, but there does seem to be a sort of pervasive attitude of, India is teaching England a lesson now. We're taking over ownership of all your famous brand names. And I can't help wondering if that sort of attitude, it's difficult to put the context into words, to be quite honest. It's almost as though they feel as though they're taking part of our British heritage as recompense for England's colonisation of India in the past. But I can't help wonder if that attitude is also finding its way into business. And it is just supposition on my part based on, comments that I've had from Indian viewers over the years. But if there is any truth behind it, as far as I'm concerned, you're welcome to it. You know, these brands have had the day, they're past the sell-by date. In business terms, it's a bit like going into an Asda supermarket, going straight to the reduced shelf and waiting for the last markdowns on goods that are about to go out of date and are no longer saleable, and then snapping them up for pennies. That's what these brands are to me nowadays. You know, they're out-of-date goods. All brands have a sell-by date, they have a shelf life. And as far as the UK economy is concerned, these are way past their sell-by date. You know, brands like Norton and Brough Superior, because our economy no longer really requires motorcycles. Most of us are car drivers. An overwhelming proportion of the population own and drive cars. That's part of the reason these brands eventually failed. They became failures and continue to be failures for decades. I'm not even sure that you can call Norton a British brand, because Garner bought it back from an American entity that had owned it for decades. Yes, these brand names have a lot of nostalgia connected to them by people who will be dead over the next few years, but they're essentially goods that no one wants to buy. It's possible that they can be made viable again, but not as a hyper-expensive premium brand. My personal view, and you know, let's be honest, I'm not 100% sure that this isn't in Norton's plans for the future anyway. They don't let an awful lot, you know, out of the bag. They need to step off that premium pedestal and start producing something that is more affordable, more convenient, more economical. We only have about 15 years of motorcycles on the road in the UK and Europe, and probably America, left. And fast, high-powered machines have already become irrelevant on our roads. You know, you can't use their potential anywhere without losing your license. And if you're selling high-powered, expensive machines just for, you know, rich folks to use on track day, well, there's just not that many of those people around. I mean, as far as the non-Japanese brands go, there only seems to be really Royal Enfield that's paying attention to what's happening with motorcycles across the globe. And although I don't think for a moment that Norton is in trouble yet, I think these losses were expected. You can only run any business in investment mode for so long before you have to make a decision whether or not you're going to continue with it. There's a sort of an unwritten rule or sentiment in business that if a particular business model is not making money by the time it's 5 years old, it never is going to make money and it's time to close it down. So in that respect, Norton really needs to be sort of making some money in the next 2 to 2.5 years. If it truly is a vanity project, as has been suggested to me, it might last a little bit longer. But inevitably, common sense has to kick in at some time and somebody has to say, enough's enough. All we can do is wait and see what happens. Please don't think that I'm being derogatory about Norton or BSA or any of those companies on these endeavours. The thing is, you reach a stage in your life where, you know, you've seen all this play out before so many times with so many different brands. Occasionally it works, but more often than not it doesn't, and I just feel as though I'm watching history repeating itself again. Let me know your views in the comments section down below. Right, once again, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video and in doing so helping to support this channel. I really do appreciate it. I'd also appreciate it if you would leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you're not already a subscriber. If you are a subscriber, it's also worth checking that your subscription is still live and you haven't been oddly unsubscribed. After I spoke about this in last week's videos, I got about 200 subscribers back again that had been old subscribers but had been unsubscribed by YouTube. So it is worth just checking. I will of course be back on Friday, so until then, please ride safely and I'll see you soon.